I'm Dr. Megan King. I am the Public Engagement Manager here at Benjamin Franklin House, and today we'll be discussing the tract relative to the Hutchinson affair. So this is our first stop for ink and independence, and it's quite a significant first stop, I think, as well, because it marks Franklin's departure from royalist and his transition to revolutionary in a lot of ways. This tract was written in response to the Hutchinson letters affair. In 1773, Franklin inherits a set of letters which were written by Andrew Oliver and Thomas Hutchinson, who were the lieutenant governor and governor of Massachusetts at the time. And as Franklin sees it, the correspondence grossly mischaracterizes colonial behaviors and protests. By and large, colonists sort of felt like they had done things the right way. And still, despite all of this, Parliament was not necessarily willing to compromise with some of their demands. When Franklin reads these letters, he's kind of struck by the language used in them. Thomas Hutchinson suggests that colonists just need to learn to accept an abridgment of English liberties. And I think that was kind of the big line that a lot of colonial American writers drew from these letters, to see that their own representatives were suggesting that they didn't rank sort of as high as full-blooded native-born English people was really, really concerning to them. When Franklin reads this set of letters, he decides he needs to get a second opinion. So he sends it back to his friend Thomas Cushing, who was the Speaker of the House in Massachusetts at the time. He says, these are not for public consumption at all. Please do keep them to yourself. So again, we don't fully know how these letters wind up getting leaked, but selective bits were sort of spread from person to person. Once this information then becomes public, that's when things really start to fall apart for Franklin. On both sides of the pond, it is kind of instant pandemonium. So in Boston, and even as far south as Philadelphia, there were protests surrounding the release of this information. But here in London, there was sort of an equal pandemonium, but it was for the opposite side of the argument. So for him, pretty instantaneously, the tables turn. He went from being someone who was quite respected and revered in the community to somebody that Londoners, by and large, had to keep at arm's length, because it very much would have been a guilty by association type of situation. So it's kind of significant to be sat here in Franklin's parlor at the Benjamin Franklin House at 36 Craven Street, because you can almost imagine him coming home to Mrs. Stevenson's house here after just being absolutely ripped apart by the Privy Council and seeking the solace that he had in his home here. So that then takes us to the beginning of 1774, where Franklin is confronted by the Privy Council, by Alexander Wedderburn, the Solicitor General at the time. And in that meeting, Wedderburn completely tears Franklin apart. He questions his character, his decision-making, and makes some pretty serious accusations against Franklin. This is a huge turning point for him once he sees that all of his work, all of his energy has effectively been wasted. That's where he sort of starts to pivot from, we need to repair our relationship with Britain, to maybe we should actually consider mobilizing against Britain and preparing for some sort of large-scale conflict. So with this source, the tract relative to the Hutchinson affair, Franklin is essentially kind of trying to justify his actions a bit more. And it's interesting because there is a disparity between his original confession and this source. In his original confession, he's a bit more apologetic, but in this source in particular, he comes across as quite defensive, not apologetic, and honestly a little bit bitter about the way that this whole conflict unfolded. Throughout the source, he quotes little sections of the Hutchinson letters and really works to kind of beef up his case to sort of say, sure, maybe I did make a mistake, but the colonists certainly deserved to know that these things were being said about them. And he goes on to argue that because these were written by government officials, they should actually be in the public domain. It should be something that the public is privy to. So it's an interesting sort of transition. There's not a lot of time that separates Franklin's confession from this tract, but it's interesting to see how quickly his mindset shifts, I think.